The fire is not slowing down, it is spreading. Right now, across a geography that stretches from the deserts near Isfahan to the ports of Chabahar, from the northwest city of Tabriz, struck in this conflict for the very first time, to the narrow, oil-choked waters of the Strait of Hormuz, American bombs are falling on Iranian soil for the 9th consecutive night. 9 nights without pause, 9 nights without a single American aircraft lost, 9 nights in which the most sustained American air campaign ever executed against Iran has moved inward, deeper, higher, and into target categories that no previous conflict between these two nations has ever reached. The sirens are not stopping, the region is not exhaling, and the number that should stop every person watching this from treating it as background noise is not the price of oil, not the number of ships diverted, not the count of intercepted missiles. It is 17 American service members killed since this war began. And over this past weekend, CENTCOM confirmed something that carries a weight that no press release can adequately capture. The remains of a missing American soldier killed in an Iranian attack were found. Identification is still pending. 17 fallen, 1 found. And the 9th night of strikes is already underway. This is no longer a skirmish. This is America's longest sustained air campaign against Iran in history. And it is escalating, not stabilizing. But let's back all the way up. Because to understand what 9 consecutive nights of strikes actually means, why the expansion of the target set to Tabriz in the northwest is a threshold crossing that changes the geographic character of the entire conflict, and why the price of Brent crude, sitting at $90 per barrel, is the number that every finance minister on the planet is watching with their stomach in their throat. You need to understand the architecture of what this campaign has been building toward and why the events of this specific operational period represent a convergence of military, economic, and political pressure that the Iranian regime has never faced simultaneously in this form. Here is exactly where things stand. CENTCOM launched its 9th consecutive night of strikes against Iranian military targets in a single wave that hit Iranian military command centers, air defense systems, coastal surveillance units, maritime capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and communications networks simultaneously. The targeting logic embedded in that list is not random, and it is not simply about destroying individual assets. It is about systematically removing the interconnected systems that give the Iranian military the ability to function as a coherent fighting force rather than a collection of independent units firing in different directions without coordinated effect. Command centers are where the orders originate. Air defense systems are what would protect the command centers if they tried to stop the strikes. Coastal surveillance units are what would provide warning time before the next wave arrives. Communications networks are what connects all of those elements into something that can function as an integrated military rather than isolated fragments. Hit all of them simultaneously, and you're not just destroying hardware. You are dissolving the nervous system that makes the hardware meaningful. The expansion to Tabriz deserves specific and immediate attention because it represents a geographic threshold that has not been crossed in 9 nights of continuous operations. Tabriz sits in the northwestern corner of Iran, far from the Strait of Hormuz, far from the coastal installations that have been the primary focus of the campaign's early phases, far from Tehran, and closer to the borders of Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Armenia than to any of the Persian Gulf targets that have characterized this conflict in most of its coverage. If the reported strikes on Tabriz are confirmed, this campaign has for the first time extended its geographic reach to a major Iranian city in the country's northwest, demonstrating an operational envelope that encompasses essentially the entire Iranian national territory, rather than just its southern and coastal military infrastructure. The message embedded in that geographic extension is not subtle. There is no part of Iran that is outside the range of American strike packages. There is no city, no province, no military installation anywhere in Iranian territory that sits beyond the reach of what has been assembled in this theater. The IRGC generals, who have been sheltering in bunkers assuming that geography provided protection because American strikes were focused on the south, are now being told, in the language of Tabriz burning, that geography is not protection. Explosions were also reported in Bandar Abbas, Bushehr, Bandar Imam Khomeini, Chabahar, Syria, Hormozgan, and Bushehr in the same operational period. The geographic spread of those locations across the southern coast tells you the simultaneous scale of the ninth wave's ambition. These are not sequential strikes working their way down a prioritized target list. They are concurrent engagements across multiple geographic sectors, executing simultaneously against a target set distributed across hundreds of miles of Iranian territory in a compressed operational window that leaves no Iranian defensive system able to respond to more than a fraction of the demands placed on it at any given moment. The Growlers are jamming. The Wild Weasels are killing the radars that activate. The F-35s are threading through the gaps. The B-1s are releasing standoff missiles from outside the threat envelope. The carrier strike groups are launching Tomahawks. All of it arriving at different locations from different vectors at effectively the same time. Now understand what Iran is claiming to have done in response, and then understand what is actually confirmed, because the gap between those two categories is the most accurate indicator of the military balance available in real time. The IRGC claims it struck the United States Special Operations Hub at Al Tanf in Syria for the second time in this escalation, calling it revenge for American strikes that killed Iranian soldiers near Iran Shar. This claim arrives against a backdrop of consistent Iranian state media overstatement of damage achieved that has characterized every retaliatory salvo in this conflict. The IRGC claimed it destroyed American aircraft at Al-Assad. CENTCOM confirmed 0 aircraft losses. The IRGC claimed devastating strikes on military infrastructure across Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain. The countries absorbing those strikes confirmed interception rates that left actual confirmed damage well below the threshold of military significance. The Al Tanf claim sits in that same evidential context. The United States publicly withdrew from Syrian base positions earlier this year. Whether a special operations presence remained at Al Tanf without public announcement is not confirmed. Whether the IRGC's claimed strike achieved the effects it described is not independently verified. What is confirmed is that the IRGC is claiming it, and what that claim tells you, regardless of its accuracy, is that the regime is attempting to project offensive reach into a third geographic theater simultaneously with its Gulf operations, because projecting reach is the only strategic option available to an institution whose primary military infrastructure is being dismantled night by night. The IRGC also claims it struck a United States early warning radar and hit an MQ-9 drone hangar at Ali Al Salam Air Base in Kuwait. Kuwait separately confirmed that its water infrastructure was hit, which follows the desalination plant attack that crossed the civilian infrastructure threshold earlier in this conflict. The U.S. Embassy in Bahrain has warned American citizens that Iran may target the capital Manama itself. When the American embassy in a third country issues evacuation-adjacent warnings to its own diplomats about potential Iranian strikes on the capital city of that country, the signal that generates is not limited to the Americans in Bahrain. It is a signal to every government in the Gulf Cooperation Council about the threat environment they are now operating in, about what the Iranian regime is willing to target, and about whether the assumption that this conflict could be geographically contained to the Strait of Hormuz and Iranian military installations has survived contact with what the IRGC is actually doing. Jordan says Iranian missiles fell inside its territory in the most recent exchange. This comes after the Jordanian base attack that killed American service members and triggered the explicit multiplier response directive from the president. Jordan has been absorbing Iranian missile attacks for weeks, defending against ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drone swarms on multiple consecutive nights, losing pieces of its own infrastructure to the debris, and occasional penetrations of an air defense system that is being worked harder than it was designed to sustain at this tempo. Jordan is a massive American ally. It is hosting American forces. It is absorbing Iranian attacks as a direct consequence of that hosting relationship. And the Iranian missiles continue to target it night after night, with a persistence that reflects not tactical calculation but institutional reflex from a command structure that is operating with degraded coherence and firing at the targets it has been firing at, because those targets are on a list that was built before the command centers that managed targeting decisions were struck. President Trump, speaking after attending the World Cup final, was direct and without diplomatic softening. Iran has been damaged. The strikes were carried out in honor of American troops killed in the conflict. The language is personal, and it is policy simultaneously. The personal dimension of it, the specific acknowledgement that the strikes carry the weight of the fallen service members who triggered the multiplier response directive, is not rhetorical flourish. It is the communication of a command authority that has institutionalized the connection between Iranian attacks on American personnel and amplified American military response in a way that removes any remaining ambiguity about whether American casualties create political pressure to de-escalate. They do not. They create military obligation to escalate. That doctrine, embedded in an explicit directive passed from the President to the Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and every operational commander in the chain, is the most consequential single policy development in this conflict because it inverts the Iranian theory of attrition. Iran's theory required American cost sensitivity to produce a reduction in American military commitment. The multiplier response doctrine converts American costs into amplified American action. The theory does not just fail to produce its intended effect. It produces the opposite effect. Now look at the oil price. Because $90 per barrel for Brent crude is the economic headline that translates everything happening militarily into consequences that extend far beyond the regional theater and into the living standards and economic planning of every industrial economy on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is the artery through which approximately 20% of the world's daily oil supply flows. Under normal conditions, approximately 130 vessels transit it per day carrying crude oil, liquefied natural gas, refined petroleum products, and container cargo to customers in Asia, Europe, South Asia, and beyond. Traffic through the strait has slowed to its lowest level in 3 weeks. One vessel was reported on fire in these waters over the weekend. The naval blockade that CENTCOM reimposed has been actively enforced with direct fire against vessels attempting to breach it, producing a commercial shipping environment in which the rational calculation for every tanker operator is that the risk of attempting to reach Iranian ports outweighs any possible profit from completing the run. The Houthis have simultaneously declared the Bab el-Mandeb Strait closed, attempting to seal the Red Sea alternative routing that shipping companies were considering as a workaround for the Strait of Hormuz disruption. The combination of those two simultaneous closures removes every viable maritime alternative for Gulf energy supply and Indian Ocean trade without the weeks-long routing penalty of circumnavigating Africa. $90 per barrel is the market's current pricing of that disruption. It represents a significant increase from the levels that prevailed at the conflict's opening, when many analysts predicted that Strait of Hormuz disruption would drive prices to $350 or higher. The fact that prices have not reached those catastrophic levels reflects active American management of the supply response through Gulf partner production adjustments, strategic reserve deployments, and the diplomatic framework that the Oval Office meeting with Iraq's Prime Minister about Mediterranean pipeline infrastructure was designed to establish as a permanent alternative to Strait of Hormuz dependency. But $90 is not a stable equilibrium. It is a pressure reading on a system that is being compressed from multiple directions simultaneously, and the direction of travel in the current operational environment is not toward resolution, but toward continued and potentially intensifying disruption. Every additional night of strikes, every additional Iranian retaliatory salvo, every additional vessel diverted or disabled by the naval blockade pushes that price reading higher. And every dollar the price reading rises is a transfer of economic pain from the conflict theater to the global economy that is absorbing its consequences. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington remains open to a diplomatic solution. That statement, in the context of 9 consecutive nights of strikes, an active naval blockade being enforced with direct fire, 17 American service members fallen, an explicit multiplier response directive in force, Tabriz struck for the first time, and Brent crude at $90, requires careful analytical reading because the diplomatic channel and the military channel are not operating with the same logic or at the same tempo. The diplomatic channel says open to a solution. The military channel is executing its 9th consecutive night and expanding its geographic reach. These are not contradictory. They are the two tracks of a strategy in which military pressure is the mechanism that creates the conditions under which a diplomatic solution on American terms becomes achievable, and in which the diplomatic channel remains available precisely to signal that the pressure can stop when the conditions that would justify stopping it are met. The problem is that Tehran is not currently demonstrating behavior consistent with meeting those conditions. Its Revolutionary Guard is claiming new strikes almost daily across Gulf nations. Its foreign ministry is issuing statements about violated agreements and American bad faith. Its military spokesmen are promising responses that will go beyond the enemy's expectations. An institution simultaneously doing all of those things is not an institution preparing to deliver a diplomatic concession. It is an institution attempting to demonstrate enough residual capability to justify a negotiated pause on terms that leave its most critical assets intact. The assets it most wants to protect are not the coastal radar networks or the island forward positions, or even the command centers in Tehran that have already been struck. The asset the Iranian regime is most determined to protect is the one that is not on the current confirmed strike list. The underground nuclear infrastructure at Pickaxe Mountain, the deeply buried facility in the Zagros Mountains that the president named publicly on the record and told Iran to be ready for, is the strategic destination toward which every night of conventional strikes has been clearing the path. 9 nights of degrading air defense networks, command centers, ballistic missile storage, and communications infrastructure are 9 nights of removing the defensive architecture that would contest a B-2 mission, ingressing towards central Iran. The aerial refueling tankers moving from Al Udeid to Israeli military bases are the logistical preparation for that mission's extended range requirements. The 125 aircraft package that supported Operation Midnight Hammer in 2025 required a pre-staging and coordination architecture that takes time to assemble. The 9 nights of conventional strikes are simultaneously achieving military objectives and preparing the operational environment for the mission that those strikes are leading toward. Iran understands this sequence even if its public statements do not acknowledge it. The ongoing construction at Pickaxe Mountain, documented in satellite imagery as recently as July 9th, showing continued hardening operations and open tunnel entrances in violation of every diplomatic framework signed and repudiated, is the regime's operational response to what it knows is coming. It is hardening the facility as fast as it can against a weapon that has already been named, from a platform whose tankers are already moving, toward a target whose coordinates are already in American targeting systems. The race between Pickaxe Mountain reaching operational status and the American decision to strike it before that happens is the strategic subtext beneath every night of conventional strikes and every diplomatic statement about remaining open to solutions. Tehran's posture throughout these 9 nights reflects the fundamental tension at the center of the regime's strategic situation. It cannot accept the outcome the American campaign is driving toward, which is the permanent elimination of its nuclear program and the reduction of its military capacity to a level that removes the Strait of Hormuz as a usable strategic leverage point. It cannot reverse the military trajectory through the offensive options available to it, as demonstrated by 9 nights of anti-aircraft fire over its own capital that has not brought down a single American aircraft, and 111 ballistic missiles fired at an American carrier group that were intercepted entirely. It cannot generate the economic pressure that was supposed to change American political calculations, because oil at $90, while high, is not the $350 catastrophe that was supposed to make the conflict politically unsustainable for Washington. And it cannot maintain the domestic narrative of effective resistance indefinitely against a population that has electricity outages, blocked ports, damaged rail infrastructure, and the observable reality of its own military installations burning on footage that circulates faster than the state media apparatus can manage. What it can do is what it is doing. Claim strikes it may not have achieved. Fire ballistic missiles at Gulf partner military infrastructure from multiple launch sites simultaneously to demonstrate that it remains capable of offensive action. Attack civilian water infrastructure in Kuwait to demonstrate willingness to impose costs on civilian populations. Claim the Bab el-Mandeb closed through its Houthi proxy to create the appearance of maritime encirclement, even as the physical enforcement of that closure remains contested. Issue statements about unforgettable lessons and responses beyond expectations. And wait for a diplomatic opening that allows it to frame a pause as something other than defeat, in the language that its domestic hardline audience requires. The problem with that strategy in the current environment is that the American command structure is not offering a pause. 9 consecutive nights without a single operational break tells you the tempo of an institution that has not been asked to pause and has not chosen to pause. The president attended the World Cup final and spoke about the strikes in the past tense of something still ongoing. The tankers are moving. The Tabriz expansion has extended the strike envelope to the northwest. The multiplier response directive is institutionalized in the command chain, and the diplomatic channel, while technically open, is operating on a timeline measured in the progress of the military campaign rather than in the progress of back-channel negotiations. The 17 American service members who have fallen in this conflict are the most consequential single number in the current strategic picture, not because of what their deaths mean for American public opinion, which has not produced the war weariness the Iranian theory required, but because of what each one of them has meant for the policy framework governing the American response. Each fallen service member is the trigger for a multiplier response that amplifies the military campaign, rather than creating pressure to reduce it. The doctrine converts the Iranian strategy's primary mechanism of leverage, American casualty sensitivity, into its primary source of self-defeat. Every American the IRGC kills accelerates the destruction of the IRGC. That is not a theory or a strategic aspiration. It is an explicit policy directive embedded in the American command chain from the president downward, and 9 nights of continuous strikes without pause is the operational evidence that the directive is being honored. The honest assessment of where 9 consecutive nights leaves the conflict is this. The American military has demonstrated the ability to execute a sustained air campaign across the full geographic depth of Iranian territory, hitting everything from coastal radar nodes to northwestern cities to underground command infrastructure to ballistic missile storage, without losing a single aircraft, and without pausing between waves for anything resembling diplomatic recalibration. Iran has demonstrated the ability to continue firing ballistic missiles and drones at Gulf partner countries, occasionally penetrating intercept screens, occasionally hitting civilian infrastructure, consistently claiming more damage than independent assessment confirms, and consistently generating propaganda footage of launches that obscures the evidence of the interceptions that follow most of them. The exchange rate of those 2 performances is not sustainable from the Iranian side on any timeline that the degradation of its offensive inventory and the destruction of its command infrastructure permits. Brent crude at $90. The Strait barely functioning. 1 vessel on fire. 17 Americans fallen. The remains of a missing soldier found but not yet identified. Tabriz struck for the first time. The IRGC claiming strikes in Syria and Kuwait that may or may not have achieved what the claims describe. The U.S. Embassy in Bahrain warning of potential strikes on the capital. The diplomatic channel technically open, but operating behind a military campaign that does not pause to let it catch up. And the 9th night of strikes underway against command centers, air defense systems, missile launch sites, and communications networks that are being removed from the Iranian military architecture faster than the degraded Iranian reconstitution capacity can replace them. Nobody in Washington or Tehran is saying how many nights are left. That uncertainty is itself a strategic instrument. An adversary that knows exactly when the campaign will stop can plan around the endpoint. An adversary that does not know whether the 9th night or the 19th night or the 29th night is the last one cannot plan around anything except trying to survive each night as it comes, while maintaining enough coherent institutional function to be capable of a diplomatic decision when the moment arrives, that a diplomatic decision becomes the only remaining option. That moment has not arrived yet. The fire is still spreading. From Tabriz in the northwest to Chabahar in the southeast, from the IRGC headquarters in Tehran to the ballistic missile storage facilities in Fars province that are being struck in near real-time response to the launches those facilities just executed, the 9th night is still underway, and there is no announced 10th night because there does not need to be. The 10th night will happen because the 9th night did not produce the conditions that would stop it, and the 11th will follow the 10th for the same reason. That is what 9 consecutive nights without a pause tells you about the campaign's governing logic. It does not stop because Iran fires ballistic missiles. It does not stop because the oil price rises. It does not stop because 17 Americans have fallen. It stops when the objective is achieved or when a diplomatic framework emerges that credibly delivers the objective without the 10th night being required. Right now, neither of those conditions is met. The fire is spreading. The skies over the Strait of Hormuz are still contested, and the 9th night has not finished what it started.